You trust your parents, right? I did too, until the day I discovered they had planned to use me as free labor even before I graduated. You know that saying, family helps family? Well, my parents turned that into an excuse to make me work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, without paying me a single cent. And worst of all, I wasn't the first. My own brother went through the same scheme years earlier, and I had no idea. While my friends were starting real careers with pay and benefits, I was trapped in a cycle of well-told lies, convinced it was valuable experience. But when I found that email on my dad's computer, everything changed. I discovered I wasn't a daughter. I was a cost-cutting strategy, a disposable resource. And at that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't just my heart. It was my naivety, my blind trust, that childish belief that parents always want the best for their kids. Because sometimes the truth is dirtier than that. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. And when you find out, two things can happen. You either bow your head and accept it, or you stand up, look them in the eye, and show them you learned to play the game better than they did. I chose the second option. And what came after? Well, it was the most silent and devastating revenge they could have imagined. Stay with me until the end of this story because I promise, you'll question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and how far someone will go when they're pushed to their limit. And who knows? If you're going through something similar right now, this story might give you the courage you need to act. You know that moment when you think your life is finally about to take off? Yeah, that's exactly where I was. I had just graduated in business administration, full of dreams and plans, when my parents, Margaret and Richard, who owned a financial consulting firm, made me an offer that sounded perfect. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you come work with us for a few months? It'll be an amazing experience. You'll learn the business from the inside. At the time, it sounded like a blessing. Like when you find a shortcut in a tough game, you know? I thought, wow, how lucky am I? I get to start out in an established company, surrounded by people who love me and want the best for me. My friends were kind of divided when I told them. Some thought it was awesome. Others raised an eyebrow with that look of, working with family, are you sure? But I was convinced it would be different. After all, my parents were respected professionals in town. The company had been around for over 15 years, had big clients, all that. I saw it as a springboard, a strategic start. No need to start from scratch, sending out resumes everywhere, dealing with rejection after rejection. I'd have direct mentorship, accelerated learning, and who knows, maybe in a few years I'd take on a real leadership role. That's what was running through my head. The offer came on a Sunday afternoon, one of those relaxed family lunches where everyone's in a good mood. My mom served my favorite dish, and my dad was especially cheerful. "Sweetheart, we've been thinking a lot about your future," he began, with that paternal tone that always made me feel safe. "The company's growing, and we want you to be part of it. Not as just another employee, but as someone who's really going to understand the business inside and out." My mom added, "You'll have access to everything, Emma. Important meetings, strategy, client relations. It's an opportunity most people would pay a lot for." I was so excited I didn't even ask the right questions. I didn't ask about pay, about a contract, or even what my exact responsibilities would be. I just said yes, with that enthusiasm of someone who thinks life is finally falling into place. "When do I start?" was basically all I said. My dad grinned, exchanged a look with my mom that I took as pride back then, but now I know it was something else. "Next Monday." "Oh, and Emma, one thing. Since you still live at home and we cover all your expenses, it doesn't really make sense to pay you a formal salary right now, does it? Think of this as an intensive internship. We'll figure out the rest later." That should have set off alarm bells in my head, but it didn't. I rationalized it. It made sense. They already supported me, so it would be weird for them to pay me too. Plus, the experience was worth gold, right? Wrong. So wrong. But I wouldn't find that out until weeks later, when reality started showing its ugly face. At that moment, I was on cloud 9, imagining my bright future, posting on social media about my new journey at the family company. The comments were all positive, everyone saying I was lucky, privileged. And I believed it. I really did. The first week was fine. I got to the office at 8 a.m., met the staff, got my desk and computer. There were about 10 people working there, most of them for years. Everyone was polite, but I noticed something strange. They treated me differently, not disrespectfully, but not the same as they treated each other either. There was this deliberate distance, like they were afraid to get too close to the boss's daughter. A co-worker named Jennifer, who had been there for 5 years, came up to me on the first day and said quietly, "Welcome, Emma. If you need anything, just ask." But the way she said it, with that half-forced smile, left a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. My dad gave me my first tasks: organizing old files, updating spreadsheets, doing market research. Normal stuff. But as the days went by, the tasks started to change. "Emma, since you're heading home, can you stop by the store and grab some things for the office kitchen? Emma, your mom's car needs a wash. Would you mind taking it? Emma, we have an important meeting tomorrow, so I'll need you to stay late tonight preparing materials. And since you'll be here anyway, could you also organize that messy archive room?" Little by little, the line between professional work and personal errands started to blur. By the end of the first month, I was exhausted. I worked from 8 in the morning to 8 or 9 at night, sometimes even later. Weekends? Forget it. "Emma, we need to review some contracts. Can you look them over on Saturday?" And I did, because after all, it was for the family, for my future. My friends started complaining that I was never around. My boyfriend at the time, Jason, said I'd changed. Distant, always tired, but I justified it. It's temporary, it's an investment. Every beginning is hard. What I didn't know was that it wasn't a beginning. It was a setup, and the revenge. I didn't even know I'd someday plan was being built. Brick by brick, lie by lie, every single day I spent in that company. The second month was when things started to get really strange. It wasn't anything obvious, you know. It was one of those situations where you can feel something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is. The professional tasks continued, sure, but they always came with little favors. "Emma, since you're going out for lunch, can you pick up these clothes from the dry cleaner for me?" My mom would say it with that casual smile, like it was the most normal thing in the world. And me, naive as I was, thought I was just being helpful, being a good daughter who also happened to be an employee. But that wasn't it. It was exploitation disguised as family affection. My work schedule had become a joke. 12, sometimes 13 hours a day. I'd come home dead tired, with no energy for anything else, and still have to hear, "Oh, but you're home. It's not like you're stuck in traffic, right?" My dad would say that, while asking me to review reports at 10 at night. Weekends had become an extension of the work week. Saturday morning, there I was in the office, just finishing a few things. Sunday afternoon, replying to urgent emails. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always had some work-related excuse. Jason started getting serious during our conversations. "Emma, this isn't normal. They're using you." But I defended my parents fiercely. What really bothered me was the way the other employees treated me. Jennifer and I had started exchanging glances in the hallway, the kind that say more than words. One day in the break room, when it was just the two of us, she said, "You work harder than everyone else here combined, Emma." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation laced with something I couldn't yet decipher. Another employee, a guy named Michael who handled the financial side, avoided me constantly. Whenever I walked into a room, he'd find an excuse to leave. It was obvious something was going on, but I couldn't figure out what. It was like everyone knew a joke I hadn't caught on to yet. My parents, on the other hand, kept up their motivational speeches. "Sweetheart, this is an investment in your future. Every successful entrepreneur went through this, worked hard at the beginning." My mom loved that narrative of effort and dedication, that I was learning through experience what no college could teach. And part of me believed it, you know? Because when you hear something over and over from people you love and trust, your mind starts to accept it as truth. It's like a soft kind of brainwashing, wrapped in sweet words and family smiles. But the truth was, I wasn't being trained to be a leader. I was being conditioned to be exploited. The personal errands got completely out of hand. Going to the bank to handle their issues, picking up documents from the notary, taking the dog to the vet, shopping for office supplies, cleaning the house when the maid couldn't make it. "Since you're free right now," became the most hated phrase in my vocabulary. And I was never free. But they always found gaps, always found a way to fit me in somewhere. The worst part was how these things were mixed in with legitimate work. Like, I'd spend all morning preparing an important presentation for a client, feeling professional and valued. And then at lunch, "Emma, can you run to the supermarket to buy coffee for the office and pick up that package from the post office for me?" Jason finally snapped at me on a Friday night. I'd canceled our dinner for the third time that month because my dad needed me to finish some contracts. "Emma, wake up! They're using you like a servant, not an employee. You work harder than everyone else, you don't get paid, and you're still doing household chores for them. This isn't normal." I got mad, super defensive. I told him he didn't understand, that it was different, that family works like this. But when I hung up the phone, I lay on my bed and cried. Because deep down, in that quiet corner of the soul we try to ignore, I knew he was right. I just didn't want to admit that the people I loved most in the world were deceiving me. By the end of the second month, I was completely isolated. My friends had given up trying to make plans with me. Jason had grown distant, and my old college classmates were moving forward in their careers while I was stuck in that limbo. No salary, no real recognition, just empty promises. And the worst part? I was starting to change. The person I saw in the mirror looked tired, lifeless, drained. My mom commented over lunch, "Wow, Emma, you look awful. Are you taking care of yourself?" The hypocrisy was so thick I almost laughed. Almost. But I didn't. Because at that moment, something inside me started to wake up. A quiet anger. A question that refused to be silenced. And without realizing it, I was planting the first seeds of what would become my revenge. The third month started differently. Not because things improved, but because I began paying real attention. You know when you remove those invisible blinders and start seeing what was always there, but you kept ignoring? That's exactly what happened. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those gray work mornings when nothing extraordinary should happen. My dad had asked me to organize some files on his computer while he was at an off-site meeting. A simple task: rename folders, delete duplicates. That boring administrative stuff. But it was in that boredom that I found the first clue that my life was a well-told lie. I was there, clicking through folders, when I saw one named HR, Confidential. Normally I wouldn't have opened it, but something nudged me. Maybe it was fatigue, maybe intuition, I don't know. I opened it. Inside were payroll spreadsheets, contracts, employee histories. I started scrolling without much expectation until a name caught me. David Mitchell, senior analyst, terminated in March. March. Exactly the month I'd started. The coincidence bothered me. I dug deeper. The guy earned almost $6,000 a month, had benefits, health insurance, everything above board. And he'd been let go right when I started. My heart started racing. I kept investigating, half trembling, with that feeling you get when you're about to discover something you wish you hadn't. I found an attached email, a conversation between my dad and my mom from 2 months before I graduated. The subject line read, "Cost reduction strategy." I read every word like I was reading my own sentence. "Margaret, if we let David go and put Emma in his spot for a few months without pay, we save at least $30,000 until we can hire someone cheaper. She's finishing college anyway. She'll accept it as experience. We'll decide what to do with her later." My vision blurred. I read it again. And again. Those words wouldn't properly register in my head. I closed everything quickly, afraid someone would walk in and catch me reading it. My whole body shook. I sat in the chair trying to process what I'd just discovered. It wasn't about giving me experience. It wasn't about preparing me for the future. It was about saving money. I was literally a free replacement for an employee who was too expensive. And worst of all, they had planned it. It wasn't an opportunity that came up. It was a calculated scheme. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disgust like I'd never felt before. How could my own parents do this to me? How could they smile at me every day knowing exactly what they were doing? It was betrayal at the deepest level. I spent the rest of the day on autopilot. I smiled when I had to, answered when people asked me something, but my mind was elsewhere. It was processing, analyzing, connecting dots. Suddenly everything made sense. The odd treatment from the staff, Jennifer's looks, Michael avoiding me. They knew. Of course they knew. They'd seen a competent colleague fired and the boss's daughter take his place without earning a cent. It must have been embarrassing for them. Outrageous, too. I was the villain without knowing it. The privileged one who accepted unpaid work while someone who needed that paycheck was shown the door. But I hadn't chosen it consciously. I had been manipulated. When I got home that night, my parents were watching TV in the living room, completely relaxed, as if nothing had happened. Because to them, nothing had happened. I was the one who'd uncovered the truth. "So, kiddo, how was your day?" my dad asked, with that warm smile he always wore. I almost threw up. "Fine," I answered, and rushed up to my room. I sat on the bed and cried silently, my hands covering my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound. I cried for my naivety, for broken trust, for lost time. But amid those tears, something different began to grow. It wasn't just sadness. It was determination. It was anger sharpened into focus. If they'd used me, I needed to know how deep it went. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them yet. I wouldn't give in. I wouldn't explode in drama. I'd do it differently. I would investigate more, gather evidence, understand exactly what was going on before acting. Because if there was one thing my parents taught me unintentionally, it was strategy. They had planned to use me. Now, I would plan my exit. And it wouldn't be any exit. It would be one they would never forget. I went to bed with puffy, tear-streaked eyes, but with a mental clarity I hadn't had in months. Naive Emma died that Tuesday. The Emma who woke up the next day had one very clear objective: find everything, collect proof, and when the time came, execute the most silent and devastating revenge they could imagine. The following days were the hardest of my life, not because of the work itself, but because I had to pretend everything was normal while I was boiling inside. I'd wake up, have breakfast with my parents, listen to their jokes, accept their tasks, smile when necessary. But each smile was a tightly glued mask. Every "thank you" I said tasted bitter. I'd become an actress in my own life, playing the obedient, excited daughter while, behind the scenes, I was investigating every corner of that company looking for more buried truths. And the more I dug, the fouler the hole got. It was like peeling an onion of lies, each layer revealing something worse than the one before. I started quietly. Whenever my dad or mom left for meetings, I'd take the chance to snoop through files, old emails, documents forgotten in drawers. I became an expert at clearing access histories, at putting everything back exactly the way it was. I found things that made me question whether I really knew these people. For example, my older brother Thomas, who lives in another state and whom I hardly ever talk to, had worked at the company 5 years earlier, right after he graduated. I found records, emails, even old photos. He'd been there for almost a year, without pay too. The exact same scheme. When it didn't work out, they let him go with the excuse that he didn't have the right profile for a family business. My God, they'd done it before. I called Thomas one afternoon, something I hadn't done in years. The conversation started odd and a little formal. But when I brought up the company, the silence on the other end was deafening. "Emma," he finally said, his voice exhausted, "get out of there. Leave while you still can." I asked what had happened to him. Thomas sighed and told me everything. Our parents had promised experience, a future, growth. They used him to cover the departure of 2 employees, made him work late, on weekends, without paying him. When he began to ask for compensation, they invented that he wasn't committed enough and cut ties. He moved out soon after, hurt and humiliated. Our relationship was never the same. That destroyed me. It wasn't just happening to me. It was a pattern. My parents had turned exploiting their own children into a business strategy. And worse, they were good at it. They knew exactly how to manipulate, how to use love and family guilt to keep us trapped. But family helps family, right? That phrase my mom repeated all the time was actually a control tool, and it worked perfectly. Because who would suspect their own parents? Who would think the people who raised you, who gave you everything, could use you like that? I certainly didn't. Until 3 weeks ago, I defended them to the death. Now, every word out of their mouths made me nauseous. I kept investigating and found something even worse. The company was in serious financial trouble. Not a general crisis, just bad management. My parents had made poor investments, lost major clients, and were trying to recover by cutting costs any way they could. Firing David and putting me in his place was only the beginning. I found projection spreadsheets where they planned to keep me for at least a full year. After that, there were notes about hiring interns or recent grads willing to work for pitiful wages. I was literally a temporary patch until they stabilized the finances. And after I'd be discarded with some well-crafted excuse. The most painful part was finding conversations about how to keep me motivated. My mom had written, "We need to praise Emma more, make her feel important. If she gets discouraged now, we lose the workforce." Workforce. My own mother had called me workforce. All those loving words, those "we're proud of you," those "you're doing so well," were calculated. They were bait to keep me working for free, to keep me trapped in that cycle of exploitation. I had become a resource, not a daughter, and they were so good at pretending I would never find out if it hadn't been for that file on my dad's computer. Luck? Fate? I don't know. I only know it changed everything. Jason reached out again around that time. He called worried because I'd disappeared from social media and wasn't responding to anyone. I told him everything, every detail, every discovery, every lie. He was shocked. "Emma, you need to get out right now. Grab your things and get gone." But I said no, because leaving in a hot-headed way, exploding, fighting, that's what they'd expect. That would be emotional, loud. And in the end, I'd be the villain of the story, the ungrateful daughter who didn't appreciate the opportunity. No, I wanted something different. I wanted them to feel what I felt. Betrayal, humiliation, loss. And for that I needed time, strategy, and coldness. The revenge wouldn't be shouted. It would be whispered. And by the time they realized what had happened, it would already be too late to fix it. From that moment on, I became someone I barely recognized. But you know what's funny? I liked this new version of myself. Focused, calculating, patient. I learned that real revenge isn't about exploding, shouting, or making a scene. It's about playing chess while everyone else thinks they're playing checkers. I kept working as usual, taking all the absurd tasks, smiling at my parents, being the always perfect Emma. But behind that facade, I was assembling every piece of my plan with surgical precision. First step: secure my own future before destroying theirs. Because revenge means nothing if you end up worse off, right? I started sending out resumes discreetly, not just anywhere, specifically to firms that competed with ours. There were 3 big consultancies in town that went after the same clients as my parents. One of them, Harrison & Associates, was led by a man named Robert Harrison, whom my dad hated with a passion. They had history. Some old fight over a stolen client, corporate ego stuff. Perfect. I sent my resume straight to Robert's email with a killer cover letter. I mentioned my degree, my experience at my parents' firm, and hinted that I knew the ins and outs of how they operated. 3 days later, I got a call asking me to come in for an interview. The interview was surreal. Robert looked at me with an interest that went beyond the professional. Not romantic, but strategic. He knew I was the competitor's daughter. "Emma, can I be frank? If I hire you, I'll have access to valuable information about your parents' company, strategies, clients, methods. Does that bother you?" I looked him in the eye and answered with a coldness that surprised me. "Robert, my parents used me as free labor for months. They exploited me, lied to me, treated me like a disposable resource. So no, it doesn't bother me at all. The grin that spread across his face was almost frightening. I was hired on the spot, with an excellent salary and real benefits. But I couldn't start right away. I needed time to line everything up. I negotiated with Robert to start a month from then. That gave me exactly the window I needed to collect sensitive information from my parents' firm. And I wasn't playing. I began copying everything important. Client lists with direct contacts, service strategies, commercial proposals, pricing tables, negotiation tactics my dad used. Anything that could be useful to my new employer. Every USB drive I filled with information felt like a silent stab in the back of those who had done the same to me, and I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. At the same time, I began documenting my own exploitation. Screenshots of messages where my parents asked me to run personal errands, photos of my watch showing the absurd hours I worked, a list comparing all the duties I performed with those of paid employees. I spoke to Thomas again and asked him to document what had happened to him years ago. My brother, who'd been hesitant at first, got fired up once he understood what I was planning. Finally, somebody's going to put them in their place, he said. I organized everything into a tidy folder, with dates, evidence, and a clear timeline. If I needed to use it legally later, I'd be ready. The most delicious part was realizing my parents suspected absolutely nothing. I'd become invisible because I looked so normal. They were so comfortable in their lie, so confident they'd pulled one over on me, that it never crossed their minds that their obedient little daughter might be plotting. My mom even remarked at dinner, "Emma, you've been so dedicated lately. We're really proud of you." I smiled and thanked her, but inside I was laughing at the irony. Proud of what? For raising a daughter who learned to be as strategic as they were? That lesson I'd learned well. 2 weeks before my start date at Harrison & Associates, I took the next step. I told Jennifer and Michael I was leaving. But not just a heads up. I asked them to keep absolute secrecy until the day I made it official. I quickly explained what I'd discovered, and their reactions were relief mixed with anger. We knew something was off, Emma, but it wasn't our place to speak up, Jennifer admitted. Michael was more blunt. Your parents are great at business, terrible at character. You're doing the right thing. They promised to say nothing, and more than that, offered to provide statements about the work environment and the company's questionable practices. Every ally I gained was another brick in the wall that would trap my parents with no way out. Revenge was taking shape, and the best part was that no one outside of me understood the size of the storm about to fall. The day of the confrontation felt both liberating and terrifying at the same time. I had scheduled my last day at my parents' company for a Friday late afternoon. Not by accident. It was the night of the monthly family dinner we always held. That sacred tradition where everyone gathered at the dining table to strengthen family bonds. The irony was so thick it hurt. I'd spent the whole week getting everything ready. Documents copied, important emails forwarded to my personal account, final conversations with Jennifer and Michael. Everything was in order. And best of all, my parents remained completely oblivious, planning to exploit me for months more as if I were a permanent piece on their board. When I got home that Friday, the table was already set. My mom had made that special turkey she only cooked for important occasions, and my dad had opened an expensive bottle of wine. Everything looked beautiful, warm, welcoming, and utterly false. The three of us sat down and the conversation started light. My dad talked about a new client they'd landed. My mom mentioned a trip they wanted to take. I listened with a half smile, waiting for the right moment. Then my dad raised his glass and said, "A toast to our Emma, who's been a cornerstone at the firm. We're thinking of giving you more responsibilities in the coming months." More responsibilities. 0 salary. I took a deep breath. "Funny you should say that, Dad," I began, my voice calm in contrast to what I was feeling inside. "Because I have some news about my future at the company, too." They looked at me with positive expectation, thinking I'd thank them or show excitement. "I'm not going to work with you anymore. In fact, this is my last night living here." The silence that fell in the room was the kind where you can hear your own heart pounding. My mom reacted first. "What do you mean, Emma? What are you saying?" My dad frowned, still processing. I continued, steady. "I was hired by Harrison & Associates. I start Monday. with a salary, benefits, everything a real employee deserves. The expression on their faces changed in slow motion. Confusion turned to surprise. Surprise turned to anger. "You can't do this!" My dad exploded, pounding his hand on the table. "After everything we did for you, all the experience we gave you, you're going to work for Robert Harrison? For our biggest rival?" I smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone finally taking off a mask. "Experience? Is that what you call exploitation now?" I pulled out my phone and began to read aloud the email I'd found. The one about cost reduction, about using me to save money. The look on their faces was like they'd been punched. My mom went pale. "Emma, you don't understand the context." "No, Mom. I understand the context perfectly." I cut in, my voice harder than I knew I had. "You used me. You planned to use me before I even graduated. You made me work 12, 13 hours a day without paying a cent, loaded me with personal errands like I was household help, and still had the nerve to call it for my own good. And you know what's worse? You did the same thing to Thomas, your own son, who you pushed away from the family because he dared to question you." I said my brother's name and watched something break in my dad's eyes. He hadn't expected me to know. No one had. My dad tried to change tactics and went for emotional manipulation. "Sweetheart, you're getting this wrong. We love you. We wanted to prepare you." I raised my hand and stopped him mid-sentence. "No. Don't try to hide exploitation behind love. You had months to treat me like a real daughter and a real professional. You chose to treat me like disposable labor. Now you'll deal with the consequences." I told them about the documents I'd copied, the information I was taking to Harrison and Associates, and the testimonies I'd collected from employees. With every word, I watched their empire of lies crumble. I felt no pity. I felt justice. My mom began to cry, but not with remorse, with the realization of having been caught in her own trap. "Are you going to destroy your family's business out of revenge?" she asked, theatrical. That's when I said the line I'd rehearsed in my head dozens of times. "No, Mom, I'm not going to destroy anything. You already did that when you decided profit mattered more than integrity. I'm just leaving the ship before it sinks, and I'm taking what's rightfully mine. My dignity, my future, and yes, some information you should never have given me access to if you truly trusted me." I stood up, grabbed the suitcase I'd already packed in my room, and walked out the front door without looking back. The revenge didn't need to be shouted. It had already been served, cold and calculated, at that Friday night dinner they'd never forget. The first few weeks after I left home were surreal. I rented a small apartment, mine, finally, and started at Harrison and Associates. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling that weight on my chest. You know that feeling when you take off tight clothes after a long day? It was like that, but multiplied by 1,000. I woke up in the morning without that knot in my stomach, without having to pretend, without having to smile at people I no longer respected. Jason came back into my life for real, and my friends started to recognize me again. "You're back to being yourself," one friend said over coffee, and she was right. I had lost myself in those months of exploitation. I had become a shadow. Now, I was being reborn. At the new company, the difference was staggering. Robert treated me like a real professional. My work was acknowledged, and my salary hit my account every month. I had set working hours, lunch breaks, time for a life outside the office. Sounds basic, right? But for someone who had gone months without any of that, it was revolutionary. And the information I took with me? Let's just say it was put to very good use. Harrison and Associates began approaching strategic clients from my parents' company with better, more personalized offers. Within 3 weeks, 2 major clients switched over. In 2 months, there were 5. My parents' company started to feel the hit, and it was impossible not to see my fingerprints all over it. Of course, my parents tried to contact me, calls, messages, emails. At first, they were furious. "You betrayed your family. Hope you're happy with what you've done. You'll regret this." I blocked all of them. I had nothing left to say, but it didn't stop there. Jennifer, who stayed there a few more weeks, told me my parents were desperate. They'd tried hiring someone to replace me, but no one would accept the conditions they offered. Either the pay was too low or the hours were insane. And the old employees, who'd seen what happened to me, started questioning their own working conditions. Michael was the first to quit. He resigned and even threatened to sue for unpaid overtime. Jennifer left soon after, exhausted by the toxic environment and constant pressure. Others followed. The company my parents had spent 15 years building was falling apart, and not because of the competition, but because of the toxicity they'd cultivated from within. You can fool people for a while, but eventually the truth comes out. And when it does, it brings every consequence with it. I didn't have to do much more than walk away and take what was mine. The rest was just the natural outcome of their own choices. 3 months after I left, I got an unexpected call. It was Thomas. "Emma, have you seen the news?" I hadn't. He sent me a link. My parents' company was under investigation for labor violations. Apparently, a former employee had filed a lawsuit, which opened a much larger investigation. More cases came to light, including Thomas's. The documents I'd gathered ended up being used as evidence. I wasn't the one who handed them over, but things have a way of finding their path when they're meant to. Their reputation in town was destroyed. Clients fled, lawsuits piled up, debts grew. The empire they built on other people's backs was finally collapsing. I wish I could say I felt pity, remorse, or guilt, but that would be a lie. What I felt was closure. Justice. They had taught me that family was an excuse for anything, that love justified exploitation. But I learned a different lesson. Real family doesn't use, manipulate, or exploit. Real family respects, values, and compensates. And when it doesn't, it stops being family and becomes just a name on your ID. Did I lose my parents in the process? Maybe. Or maybe I never really had them the way I thought I did. What matters is that I gained something far more valuable. My identity, my independence, my dignity. Today, almost a year later, I'm thriving. I got promoted at Harrison & Associates. I have a healthy social life. Jason and I are stronger than ever. And Thomas is truly part of my life again. We talk every week, share experiences, support each other. We've built a bond our parents could never destroy. Sometimes I still think about them, how things might have been if they'd treated me with honesty from the start. But then I remember, people who exploit you once will do it again if you let them. The revenge I carried out wasn't about destroying them. It was about saving myself. And if they ended up reaping what they sowed, well, that's not revenge. That's natural justice. And I sleep peacefully every night knowing I made the right choice. So, this is my story. The story of how I discovered that the people I loved most in the world saw me as a disposable resource, and how I turned that pain into a new beginning. I know a lot of people will judge me, say I overreacted, say that family is family, and I should have forgiven them. But you know what I learned? Forgiveness doesn't mean accepting abuse. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back to a place that destroys you. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone who hurt you is simply walk away and let the consequences of their actions speak for themselves. I didn't destroy my parents. They destroyed themselves with the choices they made. And if you're watching this right now and some part of my story hit close to home, if you saw yourself in any part of my journey, I want you to know something. You're not crazy. You're not ungrateful. You're not overreacting. If someone is using you, manipulating you, exploiting you, even if it's in the name of love or family, that's not right. You deserve respect. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to be paid for your work, your time, your energy. And if the people around you can't give you that, maybe it's time to find people who can. Because in the end, real family isn't about blood. It's about mutual respect, about appreciation, about genuinely wanting the best for each other. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where people close to you tried to exploit you under the excuse of, it's for the family? How did you handle it? Did you get out, or are you still stuck in that cycle? Share your story in the comments. I read them all, and who knows, your story might help someone else who's going through the same thing right now. We always think we're alone in moments like these. But the truth is, There are so many people living through similar situations, just waiting for someone to say, I went through that too, and I survived. Be that person for someone today. And hey, if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel less alone, hit that like button below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notifications. Because every week I bring you real stories of people who refused to be stepped on, who fought back, who reclaimed their dignity. Stories of revenge? Yes, but more than that. Stories of justice, of rebirth, of people who refuse to stay victims forever. And who knows, maybe your story will be the next one I tell here. I'm Emma, and this was my story. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, you don't owe loyalty to people who treat you like you're disposable. You owe loyalty to yourself first, always.